Welcome to my third IB economics video. This video might take long because there's a lot of information I'm trying to pack into one video. So I'll try to simplify the explanation as much as possible. And speaking of simplification, actually, we're going to talk about models. And models is such an important idea in IB economics because it simplifies the real world for a better understanding of a specific concept that we're trying to understand. So the real world is a very complicated and complex place. And for IB economics students and for many economists actually, this idea of this complexity makes it so hard for us to actually understand different concepts and different things that's happening in our economy. And that's why as economists and also in other subjects as well, we want to use models. And usually models in economics is represented by a diagram or a graph which we'll be seeing throughout the IB economics course. And the model is very important because, as I said before, it simplifies the real world. But how do we do that exactly? And it's the idea of ceteris paribus, which means all else equal. This expression really encapsulates what we do in economics to simplify certain things. And all else equal really means that look at the other factors that might take into play in the concepts or the things that we're looking at, and we want to make them constant. We want to really basically forget about those things. And that we do that in science as well. Controlled variables, it's very similar. What we do is basically just really don't think about the other factors that are into play, and we really look specifically into and we scope into the concepts that we're trying to understand. So for example, if we're trying to understand the idea of demand, if there's a lot of factors that affect demand, we're gonna try to ignore that. We're gonna just try to look into the fundamentals of demand. And by doing this, we understand the fundamentals of certain concepts. And as IB economics students, but also as normal economists, it's really important to understand the fundamentals without actually incorporating these other factors that really make this complex. And although that's more theoretical, it's really important to understand the theoretics before we dive into the practical ideas. So that's what economics is, basically simplifying the world so we better understand what's happening in the world. And before we dive into the models, different models, I really want to talk about positive and normative economics. This is not too related to models, and this is not going to come up in an IB test, but it's something that we should really know about or we should be aware of. So positive economics deals with positive statements, and positive statements are statements that's backed by facts. So 2 plus 2 is 4. That's a positive statement. And in economics, we see that, for example, the law of demand. It's when price increases, the quantity demanded decreases, and vice versa. And that is a positive statement because it's a fact, it's a law. And when we say that, it's a positive statement, but there's also normative economics, which deals with normative statements. And normative statements are statements that's backed by opinions. For example, you say, I wish or I think the government should place tax on this good. Of course, you might have some evidence or some facts that you back up to make that statement, but that statement itself is still normative. It's still an opinion. And other people might have different perspectives on that opinion because it's not a fact, it's an opinion. And that's why there's different perspectives to it. And that's normative statement. This is very important because when we try to understand what someone's saying regarding economics, we have to really distinguish if what they're saying is a positive statement or a normative statement. Because many of the times we listen to someone that's credible, maybe, but they might be saying a normative statement, but we consider it as a positive statement just because of their credibility, and that really hurts our knowledge. And that's why it's really important to distinguish these two in other subjects as well, but especially in economics. So let's go to the models, the idea of models. The first model we'll be looking at, and a very important model that really represents what economics is called a production possibility curve, or PPC. Some people call it production possibility frontier, PPF. It's the same thing. You can use either term. I decided to use production possibility curve because it's just easier, PPC. And this right here is a PPC. In a in the beginning, it might be confusing, so I'll try to break it down and really dive into the fundamentals of a PPC curve. Sorry, PPC. So the first idea that we talked about in the first video is scarcity. And scarcity is such an important thing in economics, as I stated, But also in PPC, it really shows the idea of scarcity and how economists deal with scarcity. So scarcity is the idea of having finite resources because we don't have infinite resources, we only have finite resources. And how we allocate those resources is basically what economics is. And when you do that, we have to make a choice. Choice is really important in economics. And in economics, let's say you have a certain amount of resource that's finite. And that resource can make either good A or good B. Now we have a choice because you have to make a choice of whether you should allocate all those resources to create good B, or you should either allocate all those resources to create good A. Or maybe you can allocate some resources to good A, some resources to good B. That's the idea of choice. And there's also the idea of trade-off when you make a choice. Because the idea of trade-off is the fact that if you choose, because we have finite resources, if you choose to allocate those resources to, if you choose to allocate more resources to a certain good, for example, then then consequently and inevitably you have to decrease the allocation of resources on the other good or good B because we don't have infinite resources. Ideally, yes, we want to produce more of both of the goods, but we can't do that. That's why we have to make a trade-off. And this is And this is related to the idea of opportunity cost, which means the cost of next best alternative foregone. So let's break down this definition we have here. The cost of the next best alternative foregone. So what's the next best alternative? So let's go back to the example I made of good A and good B. So the good A, the next best alternative is good B, right? So let's say you put all your resources on good A. What's the opportunity cost? Well, it's the next best alternative for gone. For gone means you can't have it anymore, right? So if you allocate all those resources on good A, you can't get good B now. So that's the next best alternative that's forgone. And the cost of that is what the opportunity cost is. The cost of the alternative, so the good B, is what the opportunity cost is. So what is the cost? Well, cost can also, people think cost as money. That is true, but it can also be the utility or the overall benefit you get from that certain good or service. And by choosing good A, you lose the satisfaction and the benefit you could have gotten from good B. And that's why it's called the opportunity cost. Now that we understand the basics of PPC, let's really look at the graph of one of the PPCs, possible PPCs, and really understand what's happening here. And let's, make this like a checklist, and we'll go through different ideas of the PPC and see how it's shown in the diagram or the model. So here we have two axes, right? The hours spent playing the y-axis, and the hours spent working is the x-axis. So what do we see from this graph? So first of all, the scarcity or the resource that we're considering that's scarce is time. And time is definitely scarce because we don't have infinite time. And this person apparently only has 10 hours of time to either work or play. And again, the choice here is either this person allocates their time for playing or for working or maybe for both. But the idea of trade-off can be seen because again, we don't have infinite amount of time. This person only has 10 hours. So if this person decides to spend 10 hours playing, then that person has 0 hours left to do anything. And that's why they have 0 hours spent working. Now let's say this person spends 9 hours playing. Then there's an additional 1 hour which this person can use to spend their time working. And that's the idea of trade-off. And we can see that by increasing the hours spent playing, or by increasing the hours spent playing, there's a decrease in the hours spent working, and vice versa. If you decrease the amount of hours playing, then you can increase the hours spent of working. And that's because we have scarce resources. And the opportunity cost can be seen. So let's say you spend 0 hours working. Then that means you can spend 10 hours playing. But let's say you make a choice, right? You make a choice that you want to spend 1 hour working. That means you get to only play for 9 hours. That's still a long time. But from the 10 hours, there's a decrease of 1 hour. So what's the opportunity cost of deciding to spend one more hour working? Well, the opportunity cost is the 1 hour we lost from playing. And the benefit you could have gotten from the hours spent playing, the 1 hour you could have spent playing. And let's say you decide to go from 1 hour to 2 hour. So what's the opportunity cost here? Well, from Well, by choosing to spend one more additional hour of working, you lose an additional hour of playing. So the opportunity cost here again is the same. It's the idea, the opportunity cost here is the same. It's 1 hour you could have played and the benefit you could have gotten from that 1 hour. So as you can see, the opportunity cost is the same throughout the graph. If you go from 4 to 5 hours, the opportunity cost is the 1 hour you could have spent playing. 5 to 6, the 1 hour you could have spent playing. So the opportunity cost here is the same throughout. But we can see that there's an opportunity cost because it's the cost of the next best alternative for gone. The next best alternative for gone from doing one more hour working is the 1 hour you could have spent playing, and the cost of it is the benefit and the time you could have spent playing. So this is a PPC curve, and let's just look. There's actually two types of PPC curve, which I'll explain. This is actually very similar to the curve we just saw, and this is a linear PPC curve. And again, we can see that the y-axis is pizza and the x-axis is calzones. And they use very similar resources, right? If you notice, pizzas and calzones have very similar resources. And that's why we can see a linear curve. And I'll explain why it's linear by showing you the other graph. But again, it's the same idea, right? The opportunity cost of creating 1 million additional calzone is the 1 million pizzas. The opportunity cost of creating another 1 million calzones is the 1 million pizza you could have created and the benefit you could have gotten from that. That's the opportunity cost. It's a constant opportunity cost, but there's still the opportunity cost still exists. The trade-off still exists. The choice you have to make still exists, and the scarcity is the scarce resource. So PPC, this is still a PPC curve. Now you might see this PPC curve and some people might think it's the same, it's the same, but it's really not. It's really not because it shows this curve is a bowed out curve. Bowed out. This curve is a bowed out curve and it's arching outwards. So why is it arching outwards? Because it shows the law of increasing opportunity cost. What does that mean? Well, before we stated that the opportunity cost for linear is the same, right? It's constant. So let's just go back to here again. One additional million of calzone, additional 1 million additional calzones means 1 million pizza is being the opportunity cost. Another 1 million additional calzones means the opportunity cost is 1 million pizza. So the opportunity cost of increasing the calzones by 1 million is always going to be 1 million pizzas, right? That's the opportunity cost, and it's constant throughout the graph. But this is different here. But why is it different? It's because the two goods that we're considering here uses completely different resources. So we have here pizza for the y-axis and robots for the x-axis. You can notice that right away these two goods use completely different resources, but we have a set amount of resource that's not going to change, right? We only have a amount of resources, we only have a certain amount of labors, only a certain amount of materials. The idea of choice, it's pretty obvious. You can either, as I said before, you can either allocate those resources to pizza, robots, or some to pizza, some to robots. The trade-off, you can also see the trade-off. By increasing the amount of robots created, you decrease the amount of pizzas because you only have a limited amount of resources. What's different is the idea of opportunity cost. So, okay, what's different is the opportunity cost of this graph. Well, we'll see where. Okay, let's say you have 300 robots. You can create around 7 million pizzas. Now let's say you just want to produce 100 more robots. That means you have to allocate some more resources to the robots. Inevitably, that means your amount of pizzas produced will decrease, and it does decrease by around 0.7 million pizzas. But what we see here is a law of increasing opportunity cost. But because remember this, the opportunity cost of increasing 100 robots here from 300 to 400 was around 0.7 million pizzas. Now let's look at this part of the graph. Let's say you're creating 600 robots, right? That gets you around 4.2 million pizzas. And let's say you want to produce an additional 100 robots, so from 600 to 700 robots. What's the opportunity cost of doing that? Well, look at the vertical distance between here. So in 600 robots, you could have made around 4.2 million pizzas. But when you go to 7, you can only make 1 or 2 million pizzas now, a decrease of around 2 million pizzas for just 100 additional robots. Here, when we add 100 from 300 to 400, when we added 100 robots, there's only a decrease of around 0.7 million pizza. So why is there such a big difference now? Uh, Even though we are adding basically the same amount of robots, 100 here and 100 here, why is there such a big difference in the opportunity cost? Well, let's look at in this way, okay? So let's say you have zero robots. That means you're producing this many millions of pizza, a lot of pizzas. And let's say you want to increase to 100 robots. Well, that means some of the workers uh, that were creating pizza can create robots. And in the beginning, we decide to choose some workers that that their specialty is creating robots. So yeah, so that means you don't need that many resources to create 100 robots, because you just need to take a bit of those laborers who are more specialized in creating robots to create robots, and that means you don't really lose that many laborers to create pizzas. That's why you can still see a lot of pizzas being created. That's why the opportunity cost or the loss of the amount of pizzas is still low. But as we create more and more robots, we have to take more and more of those laborers who create pizzas and machines that is used to create pizzas. And the thing about that is that we don't have not all these pizza workers are specialized in creating robots. So as we use more and more laborers, as we take more and more laborers, there's the amount of laborers that create pizza who specialize or who's knowledgeable in making robots start to decrease. So as we start creating more robots, we don't have enough workers that are specialized in creating robots. So what we have to do is get more laborers to create robots, 100 additional robots, right? So by getting more workers to create robots, that means you're losing more workers to create pizzas, and by from that's why compared to here to from 100 to 200 robots, the 400 to 500 robots, you can see a bigger decrease in the amount of pizzas created because we need more workers who are not specialized in robot creating to come to the robot production, and that's why you lose a lot of workers that could have created the pizzas, and that's why we see a huge decrease in the production of pizzas. And that's why it's called the law of increasing opportunity cost. Because in the beginning, the opportunity cost is low from creating 100 additional robots. But as you go further and further, and let's say you get to 500, and if you want to create another 100 robots, you have to use more of those laborers. That means you create way less pizzas. And that's why the opportunity cost of producing 100 additional robots is way bigger because you can create much less pizzas when you lose more laborers as you produce more robots, if that makes sense. This idea is very complicated, but hope you understand. Hope you understood from that. Um, it's a little complicated. There's it's for me. I watched some videos to really understand what's happening here. It's really hard to really understand. I try to watch some videos to understand this concept. It's really hard, trust me. And it's okay if you don't get it. Of course, you have your teacher that it's much easier for them to explain in person because they have the whiteboard. I don't have that. I do have that technology, I guess, but it doesn't really work for me. And you can also watch other videos that help you with these econ 2 style. The ACDC guy, I don't know his name, I forgot his name. They really explain these concepts very clearly, and I think you should watch them. But I hope maybe I made you understand a bit more about the PPC curve. But there's a bit more about the PPC curve that I'll talk about. And it's efficiency. So let's look at the point E here. So you can see the curve here. Point E lies under the curve. So you might think that's not possible, like that's weird, like it has to be on the curve. But of course not. It doesn't have to be on the curve if you think about it. Because here at point E, you're producing 500 robots and around 3 million pizzas. That's still attainable. You can still the word we use in economics is attainable. That's still attainable. You can still produce that many pizzas and that many robots because the full capacity of the that you could have made from the amount of resources you have is 6 million pizzas for 500 robots, or 700 robots for 3 million, around 3 million pizzas. So that means you could use more of the resources to create more, but you're not using your resources effectively or efficiently because you could have produced way more, but you decide not to, or maybe you can't, and that's why it's called being inefficient. This part is attainable, but that means it's inefficient use of resources. Now at point F, you're producing around 6 million pizzas and around 600 robots. That's inattainable. That means you can't do that because this curve shows the full capability and the effective use of resources, the full use of resources. So if you want to produce more of what's possible, it's not possible. So that's why it's inattainable. This means that basically you can't do it. It's impossible to produce that amount of goods for pizzas and robots. So but how do we produce at this point if we want to? And that's why we have to do something called an economic growth. So what is economic growth? Well, what you can do is you can shift this overall curve to the right, to outwards. So you can shift it. So you can do it so the curve goes around here, and then you can attain point F. But how do we do that? Well, we have to increase the productivity, and we'll talk more about productivity later on the video. Sorry, later on in the course. But basic productivity, for example, will be maybe like in, the development of technology. So you have better technology, so you can produce way more or way more efficiently and effectively. And that's why we need productivity to increase. And that's what we want as a society, and as the government, for example. We want to produce, we want to increase the productivity of the workers, of the machines, etc. And we can attain F if we have this economic growth. But at this point, with this amount of resources in this diagram, we cannot do that. So this is basically it for this video. This is a very hard concept to understand and to explain, but I hope you understand some parts from this. I'm sorry for the very long video.